about to turn for this next hour or so to memory and take us a little bit in a different direction. And I should have said I'm Dana Gershon. I'm president of the National Council of Jewish Women. And it's such an honor, really, to be here today. I'm a little verklempt, as they say, because I've been given the honor of introducing Natan Sharansky, who, of course, does not need an introduction from anybody, but I'm going to give him a very short one anyway. As everybody in this room, I'm sure well knows, he was a prisoner of Zion and a leader in the struggle for Soviet Jews to immigrate to Israel, coming here himself. In the 1990s, he established the Yisrael Ba'aliyah Party, which was really dedicated to helping accelerate the absorption of Jews coming from the former Soviet Union. He served in 4 successive Israeli governments. He was a minister and a deputy prime minister, and probably the only person who has won both the Israel Prize, or I should say all 3, the Israel Prize, the Congressional Medal of Honor, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In July 2019, he became the chair of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, and he's currently the chair of the supervisory board of Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, which is what we're going to learn quite a bit about today. And I'll just say on a personal note that as someone who grew up in New York City in the 1970s and 1980s, there were many times that I marched for Soviet Jewry, and it's truly humbling to have met Natan Sharansky today. We're joined by also many other luminaries here. It's truly amazing. Alexander Kwaśniewski is a former president of Poland. Under his leadership, Poland joined NATO in 1999. And during his presidency, he courageously confronted the past, contributing significantly to the reconciliation between Poles, German, Jewish, and Ukrainian people. Mr. Kwaśniewski is a member of the supervisory board as well of the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Also here is Father Patrick Desbois. Father Desbois is the president and founder of Yachad in Unum, a global humanitarian organization dedicated to identifying and commemorating the sites of Jewish and Roma mass graves in Europe. He's the author of The Holocaust by Bullets, a priest's journey to uncover truth behind the murder of 1.5 million Jews, and the recently released The Fabric of Terrorists, Into the Secrets of Daesh, based on his investigation of the Yazidi genocide in Iraq. Father Desbois is the head of the academic council at the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. We also have here Professor Dina Porat. Professor Porat is a professor emeritus of modern Jewish history at the Department of Jewish History, the founding head of the Cantor Center for the Study of European Jewry, and holds the Alfred P. Slaner Chair for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism and Racism at Tel Aviv University. She served from 2011 to 2021 as the chief historian of Yad Vashem. She's currently serves as academic advisor to the ITF, which is the International Cooperation on Holocaust Education, Remembrance, and Research, now IRA, which many of us are familiar with, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Also is Ilya Kirzhanovsky.
No, Ilya is not.
He didn't come. Okay. That saves me trying to pronounce a name that's very hard for an American to pronounce. And saves us a little time, too. Finally, moderating our conversation today, thank you, a little shorter than the last person who was here, Brigadier General Sima Vanken-Gil. Brigadier General Gil is a former intelligence officer in the Israeli Air Force, Chief Censor of the State of Israel, which I find is a really interesting title, as an American, the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and Public Diplomacy, where she formulated the strategy for the campaign against delegitimization in BDS and oversaw all of the ministry's activities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sima. Thank you.
Our panel is divided into 3 different elements. We would start with a short video introducing the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, in which, in its name, we are appearing before you today. Then Ruslan, who's also with us here, the Deputy CEO of the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, will present the updated programs and future of what we are trying to create in Kiev. And eventually we would have a panel with this distinguished panelist regarding that. I would just say that this is an initiative taken by some Jewish sponsors who has personal attachment to the Babin Yar tragedy, and they have come up with the idea that this tragedy, and actually the Holocaust of all of Eastern Europe, which probably, I'm not sure most of you know how many people perished in this type of Holocaust by bullets. 2.5 million out of 6 million were killed this way. 1.5 out of them were killed in Ukraine. So Babin Yar is a symbol of what happened in Ukraine, but also a symbol of what happened in the Eastern Europe Holocaust and the Holocaust as a whole. It was a suppressed story. And ever since Ukraine became an independent country, a question which is again on the table, as we know today, they have taken the task of trying to deal with the troubled past and come up with an initiative which will commemorate the Holocaust in this troubled arena of Eastern European countries. I would just say that you all know that Ukraine is leading and having a role in actually dealing with this issue. And we have also President Kwasniewski, who will talk a little bit about his role with dealing with this troubled past. So we would start with a video, and then Ruslan. Also with us is Marek, which is Marek Sivic, which is an advisor to the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, but is a former vice president of the European Parliament. So we have a distinguished panel with us.
Kiev, a prolific center for Jewish education, culture, and political activity, abundant with important Jewish institutions and more than 230,000 Jewish citizens on the eve of the war. With the complete occupation of the city by the German forces, the Jewish population of Kiev was soon forced to gather in the Babin Yar ravines on the outskirts of the city. Headed by foot to Babin Yar, the Jewish residents of Kiev were soon forced to undress completely and dispose of their material possessions. Naked and afraid, they were beaten inhumanely and led by force into the ravine, forced to lie down on top of the corpses of other Jewish families who had already been shot. In the evening, the Germans buried their corpses under the thick layers of earth, while history buried the story of the once prolific Jewish population of Kiev. This is the untold story of Babin Yar, where an approximate number of 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children were cruelly and systematically shot dead by Nazi machine guns and handguns on the 29th and 30th of September, 1941, transforming the Babin Yar massacre into one of the single largest instances of mass murder carried out during the Holocaust. In the following years of German occupation, Babin Yar itself became a mass grave for the brutal extermination of Jews, POWs, Romani, Ukrainians, and others, reaching estimated numbers of around 100,000 lives. 4 decades after the war was over, the Soviet authorities had systematically erased the memory of the Babin Yar massacre. To mask history, Babin Yar was turned by the Soviets into a waste site. Today, in the independent state of Ukraine, and with the support of the President, the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center uncovers the facts, details, testimonials, and photo documentations, bringing to light an untold story of inhumanity and cruelness. A story that shall live in the memory of the millions that have died, so it shall never be forgotten, so it shall never be repeated.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruslan Kavatsuk. I'm Deputy CEO of Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. And I will try to briefly tell you what we do, and how we do it and why we do it. In Babyn Yar, in Kyiv, as you understand, this is the biggest mass grave of not only Holocaust but the Second World War, with 100,000 victims. And it is more. It is a symbol of 2.5 million Jews killed all over Eastern Europe, right next to their homes, usually during the day time, and not in camps, but right next to their villages and towns. And for decades under Soviet regime, it was a story that was suppressed, that was not told. Babyn Yar itself was completely erased, and a park was created on that ravine that was 50 meters deep. And we feel that significant part of Holocaust story is yet to be told, and our job is to tell that story in Babyn Yar as the symbol of Holocaust by bullets. It is an international tragedy, and it is our job in Ukraine, in Kyiv, to create the memorial that would have international significance and help us learn the lessons of this tragedy and many others that happened across the Eastern Europe. This foundation was created in 2016 and it was endorsed by the President and the government of Ukraine, and it has full support of the Kyiv city mayor. And this is the supervisory board led by Natan Sharansky that has many international Ukrainian Jewish leaders. The historic narrative was created by a team of prominent historians led by Karel Berghof, and now the academic council is led by Father Patrick Desbois, who coined the term, the Holocaust by bullets. There are two main drives behind the unique artistic concept that was developed recently, last year, and was presented. Soviet Union changed the topography of the place, and over the last 30 years, we have had many groups of victims commemorated by different groups, and unfortunately, many of those groups would compete with each other for that memory of Babyn Yar. And we've created the artistic concept that brings together the topography of the place, the historic events, the existing monuments, and creates the paths through the territory as a journey through this memorial. The group of historians, artists, scientists, and management team that together created this concept is led by Ilya Khrzhanovsky. And we basically think of the territory of 132 hectares as a complex built on the exact same place where this tragedy happened 80 years ago. The site should be united as an ensemble of museums and different artistic installations, education spaces. Basically, we speak about the Museum of Holocaust in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. That will be the main museum in this place, but also we expect to create museum for other victims of Babyn Yar, museum for the Koronivka mudslide that was a catastrophe that happened in 60s when, as a result of Soviet efforts to erase the memory of the Babyn Yar. And of course, we also want to create a museum of history of the oblivion of the tragedy that happened during Soviet times. We also expect to have a scientific and education center, the place for prayer and contemplation, some artistic installations, memorial with the names of the victims and other. Altogether, creating a joint place for contemplation and looking into the lessons of this tragedy. If we look at the map of the city, now Babin Yar, that was at the edge of the city 80 years ago, now it's basically inside the city, almost close to the city center. We have created a planning of the territory that will create numerous polyphonic narratives that will be able for different groups of audiences to come through their own entrance points. We understand that there are people who would come, for instance, to see first art installations, and then they would go to Holocaust Museum. There are some people who would come to see technological solutions inside the museum. Some people would come for education, and then they would witness the story of Holocaust by bullets. So we are thinking about it in a thematic entrances for different audiences. We have already, over last years, we have already invested $40 million into this memorial, and we have already created a number of spaces that will together be first phase of the museum. The synagogue was the first building there. It looks like a pop-up book, and it actually was found the most interesting building of last year, a spiritual building of the world by Design Awards. Muirfield, frankly speaking, it's my favorite. This is the place where you hear 24/7 the names of the victims that we have discovered. And 28,000 names, women and children, are pronounced all the time in prayers. And you can see many young people coming to this place, staying there, because it works during the nighttime. There is a little visual heritage to this place, but there were some pictures made and videos 80 years ago, and exactly in the spots where the photographers were standing, we put the monoculars where anyone can see how this place looked like and what happened there 80 years ago. As in the Babin Yar and also in other places in the city, like this one. Kurenivka tragedy that took the mudslide that took hundreds of lives as a result of silencing the tragedy of Babin Yar also was created in the space. An audio installation, former Jewish cemetery that was erased by Soviet Union, also has now the names of the victims and unique sounds of Yiddish songs and memorial songs playing there all the time. The crystal wall of crying created by Marina Abramovich as a symbolic artistic object right next to the synagogue and the Muirfield. And last but not least is the kurgan of memory. This is the place of the first building museum space that will have the story of the first mass shooting of the 34,000 Jews killed in 29th and 30th of September of 1941. And it will be open this year. Based on the 3D model inside, recreating the ravine, the 80 meters long, with the scenes of those 2 days, showing what happened. Thank you.
I think it's very symbolic that we meet today when winds of war are back again in Europe. And before we dive into the past, let's deal a little bit with the current situation, because I think we cannot ignore that, especially that we have President Kwasniewski, who just flew from the Munich Security Conference and was partly participating there and could give us some insight. So what are your main insights from this conference and as a whole, as a European politician and leader? Where are we going? What the West should have done or should do?
Oh, I think I would take a lot of time.
And you have 3 minutes.
No, I have 3 minutes, you know. But that's but maybe okay. So I say that this is not the situation for 3 minutes. I think we have a situation for years, for many years. In Munich, you know, opinions were very divided. 50% of leaders think that the war is coming. 50% that maybe not. The diplomacy still works, so nobody knows. in my opinion, about this next scenarios, only one person has some idea. This is, of course, Putin, but probably even he doesn't know what will happen next. But what is the problem, and why I speak that it is not for 3 minutes problem, but for a very long time. Putin, as long as he will be the leader of Russia, and he can be the leader quite long time, he wants to have Ukraine in own zone on influence. His main idea is to rebuild so-called Great Russia, in sense of Tsarist Russia, in sense of Soviet Union without communist ideology, but that's this idea of Great Russia. For the idea of Great Russia, Ukraine is absolutely needed. That is a crucial element of that. Great Russia cannot be without Ukraine. And that is point number one. The Ukraine, other point, wants to be independent, sovereign, and connected with Western structures. It means that controversy between Kremlin today and Ukraine is extremely deep. The West is divided. Some countries in the West, they want to see Ukraine sooner as a member of, let's say, a European family or Western family. Some countries are more reluctant, but in any case, this three position is very difficult to unite. It's very difficult to find a compromise. So my opinion is that hopefully we will have not huge-scale war, but we'll have a very long-term pressure from Russian side, some kind of escalation, de-escalation, etc. And of course, as far as diplomacy can do something, that is a good news. That is not some source of optimism, but it's a good news, because if Putin wants to meet Biden in next days, it means that next days we'll have not a war. But practically it means that economical pressure on Ukraine is still very strong. Ukraine has no chances for new investments. They have problems with credits. They have a problem with a lot of economic issues. And let's look psychologically, how long the people can live under such pressure of the war will be tomorrow or after tomorrow, or maybe next Monday, etc. That's unbelievable. I've been last sentence, don't worry. I've been last Wednesday in Dnipro, that is eastern part of Ukraine, 250 kilometers from Donetsk, and I met students, I met workers, I met people. So I see they are very, very much serious. They are focused. They don't smile, but they are prepared to fight. They are prepared to fight. And I think maybe Putin underestimates this strong will of Ukrainians to fight. And because he has no advisors, he's absolutely alone, he's authoritarian leader, and that's the problem. How much this realistic judgment about the situation is in the brain of Mr. Putin. Finally, I was president only 10 years, and I feel myself as a quite normal man. But I tell you, if I would be 20 years or 22 years president, I couldn't promise to you that I would be a normal man. You know, I know it. You know, that is very difficult. And Polish system is a very democratic one. You know, Russian system is not. So it's necessary, and then I understand we'll speak about our project in this context. But it's very important to understand this situation is dramatic, can be very tragic, is for a long time. But such projects as Babin Yar are extremely helpful to protect and to develop modern Ukraine.
As an intelligence person for 32 years, I can tell you that one of the hardest things to do is to try to understand what a dictator might do. When it comes to democracies, you have the process of decision making, so it's very easy to understand what is it. Dealing with dictatorship, this is one of the strongest challenges that we have to face. So when you say that he probably doesn't know what he will do, I guess that you are right. Natan.
But you know, with full respect to your intelligence experience, I tell you, even in democracies, we have sometimes the problems to predict what the leader will do.
Of course.
You know, we had such a situation in the United States.
Of course.
Some, you know, not.
Yeah, that's for sure. Natan, to your best estimation, what is the catch for Israel in these times between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, if to go a little bit, to make a step from our project, Israel at this moment is in a very difficult situation, partially because of the weakness, and by the way, Ukraine too, because of the weakness of President Obama when he crossed his own red lines, which he put to Syria. And as a result of his weakness then, what immediately happened, Russia put here a military base, and when I was discussing it then with our prime minister, he said, well, anyway, we have good relations with Putin. I said, look, Syria maybe will not exist, but military base of Russia will exist, and it can exist also after Putin, and it will make a lot of problems for us. Today, the fact that we have to consult Russia all the time when we are doing something against the bases of Iran in Syria, that is, as a result of it, we have to be very careful in our open expressing of solidarity and support of Ukraine. That's one of the consequences. But the second step which Putin did then was occupying Crimea. It was one after the other. So I'm simply following the line of the president. I want to say that the fact when the world doesn't know what the leaders of the free world will do, and when the world inverse, when the world knows that the leaders of the free world will not do something, it's very dangerous for the world. And now we are really suffering from the fact that there was a moment when the world didn't know what the President of the United States will do, and then the world knew that the President of the United States will not do anything. And for this, we are paying a very big price. Now, of course, Israel, I have to say, when I was the head of Jewish Agency, it was the time of the beginning of the war. We have a huge operation in Russia and in Ukraine, and then we had in Donetsk for protecting Jews or for bringing Jews to Israel. So, and we have to remember about our responsibility towards the Jews of Ukraine and Russia all the time.
Okay. Now we will go into the topic of the panel, which is the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial Center and the new things that he's bringing into history and education. President Kwasniewski, in July 2001, addressing the official ceremony for the Jedlitna massacre, the burning of Jews in a barn in 1941 by Poles, you as the President of Poland apologized for the crime on behalf of the Polish people. What would be your advice to nations and countries which didn't confront or are unwilling to confront with this historic issue yet?
Well, thank you for this very, very important, difficult question. I tell you, that is not easy to say to the own people, you know, as if you are a leader, that our history is not only with the fantastic, nice, heroic pages or chapters, that we have also such very dark parts of the history. Because, you know, that is very natural for individuals, for families, for the nations. It's better to see only the good things. It's better to see that we were victims of the war, we did everything what was possible to do, etc., etc. Jedwabne, this massacre in Jedwabne, it was unknown, even for me. When I read first time the book of Professor Gross, I was absolutely shocked, because I didn't know about it, that Polish neighbors killed Jewish neighbors. These people were Polish citizens. They had a Polish citizenship. It was not that they were foreigners, they were refugees. No, they were Polish citizens as well. And of course, in the conditions of the war, in the conditions of the Nazi occupation, Polish neighbors decided to do it. And of course, all this discussion about Jedwabne crime was very, very painful, was very dividing, but I think was very important for all of us, because if you are ready to overcome such difficult issues, difficult subjects, you are stronger, you are not weaker. to avoid such discussion, it would be the signal of weakness. And if you are ready to confront yourself or ourselves with such problems, that is better. And this is first. So my first advice to Ukrainians is not to hit these questions, but to discuss all these things, because the history is complicated. And after such discussions, discussing, of course, facts in the truth about all these events, you can be stronger, first. The second, of course, in politics, is very important to avoid what is the problem for many countries in the world now, to avoid nationalism or extremist politics. Because if you have nationalistic or extreme politics, that is very, very serious temptation not to discuss these issues, or to look only for these heroic parts of the history. And that is very dangerous, because I see such temptations in many countries, including Poland as well, and that is dangerous. So for us, for the democratic forces in the world, one of the main tasks for the future is to fight against nationalism, against extremism, against racism, against anti-Semitism, because all these elements creates wrong understanding about the history, and they misuse the history for own interest. And third point, we have to work very much with young generation. And Babin Yar project is very good because he is very much dedicated to young people. You know, we have less and less, and very soon we'll have no one of survivors. We'll have no witnesses of these dramas from Ukraine, Poland, and other places. Of course, we have a lot of books, we have a lot of movies, but it's very important that young generation should treat Holocaust and everything what happened in this period not as a prehistory, but as a very, very close history, as a something what happened with grandfathers, grandmothers, which generation which is close. We don't speak about Greek wars. We don't speak about Napoleon wars. We speak about very, very, very close history. So education of the young people is extremely important, and especially that the risk that nationalism, extremism, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism can be back is serious. That is not so that the problem is solved. No, absolutely not. That's a long story. If you know, we have no time to discuss why the situation is so dangerous now, but it's necessary to know the situation is not dramatic in this case, but is dangerous. And Babin Yar project, that is, in my opinion, one of the best ideas how we can achieve these goals, not only in Ukraine, but in the world. Because this massacre was unknown, or still is not enough known, and for Ukraine to treat correctly with this past is very important to build strong and ready to answer future challenges modern state.
And maybe just add that Babin Yar Center is courageously dealing with the issue of collaboration, doing researches, which, by the way, Father Patrick Desbois, as the head of the Academic Council, is taking part of, and Ruslan also. Father Desbois, as a founder of Yachad in Unum, but also the Academic Council of our center, what is the role of actual findings and testimonies in Holocaust remembrance? Why today, more than ever, it is important to look for evidence in order to refute historic, trivialization?
You know, since 20 years with my organization, we have filmed 8,000 non-Jews who were present at the killing sites, not only in Ukraine, from Lithuania, Poland, etc., to Azerbaijan, because the last mass graves are near Baku and North Ossetia. And it's the first time we interview non-Jews. They are not killers. They were the neighbors. They were watching. They were waiting for belongings. They were requisitioned to dig the mass grave, to fulfill the mass grave, etc. Why we do that and we still need 2 years to finish? You know, More and more I see that because I'm professor in Georgetown, people begin to think Holocaust is far away and inside a communitary memory. And I think to bring the voices of non-Jews as evidence, because when the last survivor of Holocaust will disappear, the deniers will demultiply and say it never existed. It's a big joke to make money to build Israel. And I would say, it struck me since the beginning. I will never forget what Stefan Vulkanovich, it was a man from Krakow, he told me 25 years ago. He was a good man. He told me, Patrick, Hitler made a mistake. And I said, which mistake? He told me he built Auschwitz. And I told him, why is it a mistake? He told me, because in Auschwitz, the Jews are coming back. But when they killed the Jews in forest, they never came back. And for me, I didn't understand. I was young. I didn't understand what he said. But effectively, we have found more than 2,700 extermination sites. Even in Lithuania, we found 285 extermination sites in such a small country by shootings. And nearly nobody comes back. And the fact that Babi Yar organization decided to come back, to make a museum, to make a memorial, it's an anthropological revolution. Because normally on a mass grave, you don't come back. I work in Iraq now against ISIS. In Raqqa, in Syria, not far from here, there is a mass grave as big as Babi Yar. And I think to come back in Babi Yar and to name the killers, who were these 2,000 Germans coming from Munich, Stuttgart, Berlin, and shooting their night children and grandma? Who were they? It's to give a signal to humanity. It's an anthropological revolution. Nobody normally comes back on a mass grave. It will be the first Holocaust museum on a mass grave. And I think it's a signal to say, perhaps we waited 8 years, but the Jews are back. And it's a signal for the mass killers of today in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in West Africa, to say, be careful. Sooner or later, even if the biggest mass grave, people will be back.
Thank you. Yeah, talking about testimonies and their importance to Holocaust education, Professor Dina Porat, as the former head of the Counter Institution and chief historian of Yad Vashem, what is the role of Holocaust education in the fight against current anti-Semitism spike in the world?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to answer your question, of course, but let me first refer to what happened here in the land of Israel when news about Babi Yar got here via Jewish news agencies. It was the end of September, as we all know, and the press in the land of Israel, the Hebrew press, published that 50,000 Jews were killed in 2 days near Kiev. And there was a storm in the country. No one wanted to believe. It's a terrible number. How can they do it physically? It's not to be believed. And the press editorials were bombarded with telephones, with letters and cables. And the next day, they said, okay, we made a mistake. It's 5,000. It's not 50,000. And people said, well, even 5,000 is too much. It's inhuman. Another day, the news came back that it is 30. And again, after a few days, the number was more or less established, 30-something thousand in 2 days. But since there was such deep disbelief, the press editorials wrote under the news, printed under the news, the reader will read at his own responsibility. Which means, okay, we cannot decide. And this case of Babi Yar was etched into the collective memory of the Yishuv, as the Yishuv, the Hebrew community here in the land of Israel, in pre-state Israel, it was etched into the collective memory for a long time, especially within the Holocaust and all the news about the Holocaust, but something else. To your question, of course, knowing about the Holocaust, teaching about it, I would like better the expression, not Holocaust education, but teaching. Teaching of the history, what happened, the precedents of the Holocaust. But I want to say something that perhaps wouldn't be liked too much, but I'll still risk it. I'm not sure, and we had some surveys in the IRA. I want to thank you for your introduction, in which you said that I served as the academic advisor of the IRA. You know the IRA, International Holocaust Memorial Alliance, Remembrance Alliance, sorry. Before it was the ITF, and you know Professor Bauer, who is the father of this, more or less, of this organization. He's today, in 2 weeks, he will be 96. When he was 80, his wife said, Yudele, enough is enough. You take someone younger to do the job. So he grabbed me by the hair, and I was an academic advisor. And by the way, to your former question, countries are being admitted to the IRA only if they face their future, their past, with future activities. Only if they face their past in the Holocaust. Now, after a while, after a few years of giving the money that was collected from the countries to teachers, to teach about the Holocaust, Lithuania, Poland, etc., in a good number of countries, we wanted a survey to see if this teaching is really bringing results. That's very basic. Okay, and you wouldn't believe it. The first survey was conducted in Sweden, and it said that school children, youngsters, had very difficult questions when being taught about the Holocaust. And they asked, why the Jews? What's wrong with them? Why did they let themselves be killed? This story is beyond our understanding. The questions were very harsh, were very basic, and they showed that it is not enough, I think, to teach the story of the Holocaust. And this, I think, takes us back to what you, Mr. President, said. If we teach the history of the Holocaust and the steps that led to it, not only as a story of what happened to the Jews, but as something that can concern them in their own country, that teaches or warns against the dangers to democracy, to human rights, to minority rights. Only then, if you open this story and make it more universal, more of a warning to everyone with his own story. We had recently International Holocaust Memorial Day, and the Foreign Ministry sends lecturers around. If you go to Senegal, on the beach, there is a building from which the future slaves were sent. And they say, this is our Umschlagplatz. Okay? Then you know that you got to them, that the story got to them. If you open it and make it of concern, okay, then it will work.
Thank you. You would have to give me time frame because I kind of lost track in time.
Why don't you take another 5 minutes, and then we'll save 5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
5 minutes and then 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, so very short question. Father Desbois, around the world, genocide continue today to happen. To your better judgment, why does history repeat itself and lessons have not been learned?
It's not history repeat itself, it's a very Western way to see the planet. When Baghdadi arrives in Syria and Iraq, people join him from all over the planet, China, Norwegia, America, Saudi, Jordanian, Palestinian, etc. And I think it's a tendency in humanity that suddenly somebody wake up and think he has a vocation to exterminate the bad people. But there is something common between Babi Yar and that, because now the new mass killer they learned. You know, sometimes people say there is Shoah fatigue, but there is no Hitler fatigue. And Hitler stays a reference. You can find a book of Hitler in any market in Iraq. And they know nobody rebuilt in Auschwitz. Today, when they kill people, it will be bombing and shooting and put people in mass grave. It's why what we are doing in Babi Yar is unfortunately connected to what happens today in Taliban department or in your next neighborhood, the Syrian.
Thank you. President Kwasniewski, what is your personal advice to U.S. Jewish leadership? How can they fight the rising tide of anti-Semitism, and what is the role of initiatives like the Babin Yar Center in this?
Well, the first fight, you used correct word, we have to fight. I think what Father said is true, but you know, the world is changing very much, especially because of new technology, etc. But nature of the people is very, very similar, is very same. So if you want to understand the problems of power, of love, of hatred, of everything, William Shakespeare still is one of the best authors. And that is so many centuries after. So the nature of the people is unfortunately the same, is necessary to fight. You know, the fight between the good and bad will continue. And we have to understand that anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, nationalism, everything can be repeated and is repeated in some places. So we should be united in this fight. We should speak loudly about it. We should support such initiatives like Babin Yar, and that is my appeal to you, because we need not only understanding from your side about our projects, but real support, political, personal, and financial as well. That is something what we need very much to finish this project. And I repeat again, probably the best guarantee for better future for all of us without anti-Semitism or without racism is education of young people. Because if we will create this new generation very selfish, what is a real risk? Because new technologies help very much, or really create such selfish life, selfish approach. So we should educate young people against selfishness, against racism, open understanding what means solidarity among the people, what means common responsibility, etc. That is not easy, but I'm sure that still the humanity can do it. You know, we are not determined by this negative scenario. I'm sure that we have enough power to make the world better and not worse.
Okay.
Thank you all. This was really so moving and compelling in the case you make, not just for Babin Yar, but for the importance of it, for everything else. I want to just take a minute to see if anybody has any questions. We have just a couple minutes. I see one right there. Please,
Dan.
go ahead. Just say your name and what organization you're with.
I'm Dan Mariashin from B'nai B'rith. The question is for President Kwasniewski. 20 years ago, you gave an extremely important speech at Georgetown University talking about Polish-Jewish relations. I was present for that speech. And towards the end of the speech, you addressed the issue of the need for Holocaust-era assets, in this case, property restitution. And you had offered some ideas about how that might be done. You didn't do that in the speech, but during the course of the discussion about that issue, you would come up with a couple of ideas. Since you left office, it seems that that issue really has been pushed to the back burner, and there really has not been a great deal of progress. How do you see a way to re-engage and to move that process forward?
Well, thank you. Thank you for your presence during my speech 20 years ago. But the question is very complicated. Briefly, first, Poland is a very difficult country for so-called reprivatization, because Poland changed. This is the country with the most changed borders after World War II. We lost 40% of our territory on the east. We have new 30% of the territory on the west, former German territories. Polish cities were destroyed in 90%, like 80% like Warsaw, others in 90%, 60%. So all this question of reprivatization is extremely complicated, what I said during my speech in Georgetown as well. And don't compare Poland with Czech Republic, Hungary, others, because that is not to compare. That is impossible. Secondly, we try to use some different methods to solve the problem. What I'm very proud of that, with Minister Siwiec, he was my main advisor for that, we accepted the law which gave this property to Jewish organization, synagogues, special houses, etc., etc. But this privatization for the owners is still not solved. I was sure that the best legislation is to go through the courts with individual cases. Unfortunately, after many years, we see that is not so good, takes time, and then this procedure encouraged some groups to make dirty business. And that was the reason why today's government, I'm in the opposition to this government, but this government decided to solve this problem of so-called reprivatizations mafias. And in my opinion, the biggest mistake which was done was lack of good, open, honest dialogue with Israel and with Jewish organizations in the United States. And this was a big mistake of the government. But generally, substantially, we have to do something with that. And this project is not against Jewish people, not against Jews, not against Jewish property. That is how to make an order in this element. So still we have this problem, but I think if we will be back, and that is my appeal to Israeli government, because it's necessary, is absolutely wrong. That is something what I cannot accept, that Poland has no his ambassador in Tel Aviv or in Israel, and Israel has no his ambassador to Warsaw, you know. That is something for our relations absolutely destructive. We cannot accept it. So it's necessary to start again very good dialogue to discuss all these issues. Are not easy, but in my opinion, it's possible to find some solutions. Not very clear solutions, not one solution and the problem is finished, but step by step it's possible to find the solutions.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry that we do not have time for another question.
I'm sorry for my long answer, but the problem is, you know, we cannot solve the problem 30 years, and you gave me 3 minutes, you know.
No, we were so enjoying hearing the panel from the moderator that we left very short time for our questions. So it's not you. I have to thank our distinguished panel again. This was really, really eye-opening for many of us. And
thank you very much.
We have a small, we have some small gifts for each of you. So please just let me give those to you. Some nice box teas. Thank you.
Sit. I'll stand behind you. Richard, do you want to come in?